Welcome to Bullshift, the podcast, where we talk about behavioral economics and how it pertains to ordinary people, ordinary investors as they go about their business. My name is John DeGuy. I'm the author of the book Bullshift, and I'm also the host of the podcast. My guest this week is Michelle Schriver. She is the continuing education editor with Newcom Media. That's the B2B websites that they run include cecorner.ca, advisor.ca, and investmentexecutive.com. Michelle has covered financial services since 2015, and she's a graduate of the publishing program at Ryerson University, which is what it was formerly called. Now it's called Toronto Metropolitan University. She's been nominated for several media awards and was a National Magazine Awards Silver winner in 2020. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, John. This is exciting for me.
It's funny because we were joking before that this is a bit of a turning of the tables for the people watching at home. Michelle is usually the person interviewing people like me, so this time I'm the person doing the interviewing, and it's Michelle who's on the hot seat. I wanted to begin by talking about optimism because Bullshift is fundamentally about optimism bias, and I'm wondering if you think people are optimistic by nature, just in general.
I think so. I think you kind of have to be to a certain extent if you're going to live a productive life, right? And if you're going to improve yourself, improve your circumstances, you have to have hope, right?
Well, it's funny because you may or may not know, but there's a lot of evidence that shows that optimistic people just generally do better in life. They live longer, they're happier, they're more fulfilled, they're happier with their work, their spouse, their children, what have you. So the thing is, when you talk about biases, optimism is often seen as being sort of the good bias. It's the one that helps people along the most. But the risk that I think people may be unwittingly walking into is that if you're whistling past the graveyard, if you're living your life through wearing rose-colored glasses, or use whatever euphemism or metaphor you want to use, you could be exposing yourself to certain risks because you can be blindsided because you're so sure that things are going to be fine that you're not fully contemplating what may or may not be lurking around the corner. So I'm wondering, even though you think, and I tend to share your view that most people are optimistic, is that good? Is that bad? Is it neither? How would you sort of characterize that predisposition?
Well, I mean, when you look at your lived experience, let's say, right? Things have always been onward and upward, right? In just the period that you've had to live, that I've had to live, and so when we look back, it's been one of, hey, I've done better than my parents. Are my children going to do better than me? I don't know. I mean, look at housing prices, right? I've got kids in their 20s. They're looking at housing. It's really depressing for them. So times are really uncertain right now, and if there's any time where you're going to reconsider optimism, now is the time. And I think especially for people with kids, right, who did pretty good for themselves, and they're seeing this absolutely not possible for Gen Z to do what the Boomers did, to do maybe even what Gen X did.
So I'm wondering then, to what extent do you think people in the world today think about that, about how the prospects for the future are less than what they were for the past, and that we've enjoyed a 75-year-long bull run coming out of the Second World War, and maybe these good times aren't going to be quite so good going forward?
Yeah, well, I want to tell you this, kind of paint a picture of an advisor I was speaking with. This was probably late October, early November, and everything he brought up, like just all these points within about 30 seconds, and he completely kind of exemplified what you're talking about in your book about it's time to get more have a more sober outlook. So this guy, I just asked him, how has business been? And he's been in the industry for literally decades. He's really experienced, and he said this was the worst time he's ever seen, and there's no good news to tell clients. So meeting clients isn't that fun, let's say. Accounts are down and inflation is eating into your purchasing power. He said he was researching and researching and researching and couldn't find the answers. And he also said, this, you're going to find this a bit funny just based on what you've written in your book. He said, they teach us to stay invested. And he just kind of trailed off, right? Like he was just so didn't know what to do, was uncertain about what was happening right now. And he also said, I have a lot of older clients. If there's a big downturn, will they even live to see a recovery? And I was just thinking back to that conversation after I read your book, which is really depressing, by the way. But he just kind of hit all those points and was just taking a real measured approach and was admitting, hey, this is different from what I've ever seen. It could get bad, real bad, and I don't know what to do, right? And you know, what do you think about that, John? I mean, are you feeling like this is what advisors are contemplating?
I think that's what I'm getting at with regard to the book is that I'm an optimist by nature, and I've been in the business now for nearly 30 years, and so I'm much like the person you were speaking with. But I would say that I've never seen it where the expectations for the future, the realistic expectations for the future, were as muted as they are right now. I think it's very difficult to really think, oh, there are a lot of people who are still projecting long-term returns into double digits, and that's just not realistic. And I think managing expectations is a big part of giving advice to retail clients. And even if you're not working with an advisor, if you're just an ordinary retail investor, having reasonable expectations is a big part of that optimistic coping that we were talking about off the top of the show. And so if you have unreasonable expectations, you're setting yourself up for feeling a bit gloomy when you get home from work at the end of the day because you were expecting probably too much to begin with. But the fact of the matter is, we've had multiple generations of things being better than the generation before. And so now we have to start thinking about and recalibrating what we think normal ought to be. I'm wondering now about when you you write for the advisor community. So when you write articles and edit articles for advisor.ca or Investment Executive, you're writing for people like me, people who do what I do for a living, people who give advice to retail clients. And I'm wondering if you think that the perspective that you take at Newcom is different from, say, the perspective that someone might take at the National Post or at the Globe and Mail, because your audience is different. You're writing primarily for advisors. And I'm wondering if you think about how that lands on people and what role you play.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about my audience when I write. I'm thinking about advisors. But by extension, you're kind of automatically thinking about clients too, because our aim is to help advisors do their job better, right? Like, what do advisors need to know? What's affecting their clients? So even though it's advisor focused, of course, it's gonna be about the outcomes that they can deliver. And just talking about how things are going to be different going forward. Um, One thing I really liked about Bull Shift, I just read this book over the weekend, so I'm still digesting it. I really enjoyed it though. What I liked is how you kind of turned around conventional wisdom, right? And how advisors have to kind of think beyond conventional wisdom. And so instead of saying I'm cautiously optimistic, you said, why don't we ever say I'm cautiously pessimistic, right? These kind of turnarounds of phrase are helpful to kind of expose what our biases are. And what was the other one? The potential that selling might be the right course of action for someone, right? In some circumstances, maybe in some extreme circumstances. So we always say, keep calm and stay invested. And you suggested, why can't we keep calm and sell, right? So I just really enjoyed the turnaround. And that really struck me because I'm a buy and hold investor. And it really struck me that, wow, maybe sometimes selling is the right thing to do. I think it's helpful to really help advisors right now. It's probably very helpful to highlight these kinds of things, how you can take a more measured approach, how you have to kind of think things out more carefully if what you've done in the past is not going to pan out in the future. I don't know if I'm probably getting off on a tangent. Maybe I didn't answer your question fully, but
Let's put it this way. Have you ever compared notes with the people who are personal finance columnists for the national papers, and to sort of say, so what are you writing about, and how are you positioning that, just to sort of see where the soft spots are and where the differences are?
no, I haven't done that. I mean, I look at what other people write, of course, but um, you know, of course, anyone in the media, we're consuming other media. But I can't say, I mean, I don't have anything. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. I mean, of course, we're looking at larger, the macro environment. What trends are affecting clients, what trends are affecting the markets. This all will come into play with what's going to be newsworthy and what advisors need to know about planning. Um, yeah.
What would you say are the most surprising elements of running a publication for the retail advisor audience? What are the sorts of things that maybe the people watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, might not expect?
Um, well, let's see. What did you say? What things are
Uh,
unexpected to me?
Surprising, yeah. What sorts of things would you say are, I didn't think I would have to be writing about this, but here we are.
Well, there's always the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is how slow the regulatory environment evolves. I mean, the advisors that I speak to, typically when we're speaking to advisors for our sources, we're looking at well experienced advisors who are well credentialed, and these advisors they take a leadership role, right? I mean, they want to be fiduciaries. They want to act as fiduciaries. They want to do what's right by their client. They're talking about how it took so long to get DSCs banned. Why didn't the client focus reforms just embrace a fiduciary standard? Um, and really, regulatory environment is way behind what the best advisors want to do, right? I think the slowness of that, the um, just how slow, I guess, things do change. That's always surprising, right?
And the easiest way for me to demonstrate that I concur is that in 2001, I started writing a book called The Professional Financial Advisor. And I published it in 2003, and I updated it. I put out 4 editions, so I updated it 3 times after it was first published. And I updated it every time there was a regulatory reform. So the first book came out in 2003, and then I did a second edition in 2006 because of the fair dealing model, which was an Ontario initiative. And then I did a third edition in 2012 for CRM1 and a fourth edition in 2016 for CRM2. And my thinking had always been that for sure, advisors will be professionals the way doctors, dentists, lawyers are professionals once the regulations force them to live up to those standards. And I basically gave up after 4 editions and a decade and a half of writing and trying to rely on regulation to bring about the change in the world that I wanted to see. I concluded that it's like watching paint dry, and I'm not going to. I had expended a great deal of time and effort to try to get people to realize what was going on, and I don't know that much changed. But I kept on, hitching my horse to the wagon of, okay, this time for sure, this regulatory reform will cause the industry to be a true profession the way other professions are. And I couldn't agree more. It's very, very frustrating. Can you maybe give me a sense? Can you give me a sense of what the people at Newcom would say are newsworthy? So when advisor.ca or Advisor's Edge or an investment executive is looking for a story, how much of it is it just sort of taking it from the press release, and how much of it is writing editorial content and putting it in perspective and deciding what is and is not newsworthy?
Yeah, well, our aim is always to not just regurgitate press releases, of course. I mean, we want to add value for advisors. That would be, standard here. There's editorials get written here all the time. We want to help people with planning for sure. I mean, we have columnists that highlight a lot of different planning issues. So, you know, we're definitely there's a real demarcation here between editorial and sales. I mean, no one is telling me what to write as far as worried about advertising or anything like that. That's all very clear in our editorial standards. And so I don't feel any pressure in that sense to regurgitate anything. That's for sure. I mean, again, we are encouraged to put readers first. I mean, that's actually part of the Newcom motto. I'll give a little plug there, that we're supposed to be putting readers first, right? And that means not worrying about anything like advertising, for instance.
Okay. So you've read the book, and thank you. And I hope the people watching and listening will do the same. The book, as you know, focuses primarily on optimism bias, but there are a whole host of biases that we're all prone to be susceptible to, and we're all susceptible to them. We don't always like to admit it, but the fact of the matter is, every single person on the planet is biased in some way. I'm wondering if you can offer your thoughts on the extent to which, and I'm going to talk about two constituencies here, individual, ordinary retail investors, but also advisors, because you deal with advisors. To what extent do you think those two constituencies are prone to overconfidence and recency bias and framing and the sorts of things that a lot of people in behavioral economics take as given that we all do? How much do you think we, we being, let's do investors first, retail investors, do this and do it unwittingly?
Yeah, well, lots, absolutely lots. And mainstream media aimed at consumers does not help. I mean, it's all about, what to invest in right now. Yeah, I don't know. As I said, as I mentioned, I'm a buy and hold investor, so I tune out all that. I'm a buy and hold investor. I tune out all that noise, but it's a constant onslaught that consumers are subject to, and especially it concerns me that younger consumers, people growing up, are learning that it's just normal to trade all the time, right? I see that with my own kids. They think that investing is easy and trading is easy and that's how you're going to make a lot of money, and look how someone on TikTok did it, so I can do it too. I think that's a real problem that kids are seeing, for instance, today. And advisors too, I think, are probably optimistic about what they can do for clients. I hear people tell me that there are advisors that still promise returns, right? Which is probably not a good thing to do. And so I think it's a real problem.
Do you think there might be a certain amount of yeah, but back at you for the client and saying, well, if you're making a decision about who you're going to choose to work with as an advisor, and one advisor says you should expect 5%, and the other says, well, no, 6%, and the other says no, 8%, do you just choose the one that says 8% because 8 is bigger than 5 and 6? And is that the extent of your due diligence? Because I think there's a certain amount of that going on, and and to the extent that it goes on, um, how much of that has to be borne by the retail investor who ought to know better?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. How much should the consumer be aware? I mean, why wouldn't you go with a person who's offering you 8%, right? But what you've done is you've kind of stopped. You've stopped haranguing. Let's say you've stopped haranguing advisors and started trying to educate consumers, right? You kind of did that with stand up, and you said, I'm sick of advisors not listening to me about having evidence based practices. I'm going to go straight to the consumer, and you know I think consumer education is so helpful because it is consumers really who are going to be the ones that get smart, start asking the tough questions. And when advisors get bombarded with tough questions, they have to show their work, right? They have to say, here's what my estimates, here's the projections I'm using, here's why they are reasonable. So, I think that approach of educating the consumer is an ideal one, and maybe is the way to go to get the industry to change, because I'm sure you're tired of talking about following the evidence, right? I mean, there's all kinds of research that shows advisors don't follow the evidence, and there's long-standing research. So,
Right. Okay,
you
so
know,
that brings me perfectly to a paper that I'm very fond of. It came out in 2016. It's called "The Misguided Beliefs of Financial Advisors," and it came out in 2016. It was updated in 2018, and I'm going to see if I can get the names. Linanima, Meltzer, and Previtero were the names of the three academics that co-authored the paper. And for the benefit of the people who might not be familiar with it, what they showed was that there are a number of false beliefs within the MFDA community, at least within the people who are registered to sell mutual funds. And this is a massive study. It followed a few thousand advisors and hundreds of thousands of retail clients over more than a decade. So the sample size was truly massive. And what it showed was that these advisors chased past performance, didn't pay much attention to cost, and ran concentrated positions, all of which are contrary to what basic financial advising would have us do. And so I'm curious about what your thoughts were about the paper in general, but I'm specifically curious about the way the financial press reported the paper.
Right. I think an important outcome from that paper is that the net return was 3% below the benchmark, or below the passive benchmark, right? So advisors were investing, doing it poorly, but they were also invested the same way. So it's not like they were trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. They genuinely believed these were misguided beliefs, as the researchers said. So when like I don't really remember, that came out in May 2018. I don't remember that coming across my desk. However, I know the managing editor, Mark Burgess, here at Investment Executive and Advisors Edge, did write that month. He did write an editorial highlighting that paper, and I mean, it's such an interesting paper, and it is based on MFDA advisors. So it's for our Canadian advisors. Lots of times we get U.S. research, of course, but it's great to have this Canadian stuff. So I mean, this is an important paper, as you've highlighted. I guess you were wanting to know why we didn't cover it more. I mean, we covered it once. I've definitely referenced the work in a couple of editorials. I referenced the ideas in the work. I think when final pieces get edited, the actual research name of the research might get tossed, might get cut, that kind of thing. But it is an important paper. I mean, do advisors realize that this is what they're doing, right? I mean, do you and your peers talk about that paper or that kind of research?
That's part of the problem, and this is the frustration that I felt in doing the 4 editions of the Professional Financial Advisor, and then I referenced this paper pretty extensively in Stand Up in my last book, in Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, which, by the way, was mentioned in one of the articles that Investment Executive wrote about the paper. So it married, the paper and my referencing the paper in my previous book. So I think there's, again, kudos to you. My view, though, is that this is actually the sort of thing that is just so very, very important in terms of understanding the limitations of what we can do to help advisors come to terms with things.
There was one thing I wanted to ask you. Are we getting down to time?
We've got about 8 or 9 minutes left.
Well, I just wanted to interrupt there. I thought this might be a good time to talk about. There was something in your book I was hoping that maybe you could expand on or just shed some light on. And you were saying, if advisors did have evidence-based practices, they became aware of their biases, they worked to get rid of them. And then they started to give some nuanced advice, or to give some advice that was based on, their real thoughtful approach, calculations, the whole shebang. And it was, it just wasn't your standard, keep holding, right? It just wasn't your standard advice. And at one point you say, what's going to happen is, different advisors, different professionals are going to take different approaches to the same client in the same circumstances. And those approaches one's not necessarily right or wrong. And so we're going to have some negative outcomes, right? Some of these approaches, even though they were taken reasonably by professional advisors, some outcomes are going to be negative. And in those cases, you say something like, negative outcomes shouldn't be pilloried if you can show your work. And that just kind of section of the book struck me, because I thought that sounded nice in theory. Is it a possibility in practice? And I was just wondering if you could shed some light on if there's a lot of pressure among advisors to have one course of action in a set of circumstances. I mean, are advisors free to actually just show their work and back up maybe an unconventional approach, say, to a certain client?
There's a saying that the difference between theory and practice, right? Well, in theory there's no difference, but in practice there is.
Well, I'll say what I think is bullshit. 2 words: active management. And that's not me talking. That's lots of research. I mean, going back to at least 1991, you've got Sharpe's paper on active management showing that it's not worth the cost because the returns just aren't there. And I do get the odd reader comment, even today, that active management is an important part of investing. I mean, there, the research is, that's not me saying, that's not me being negative. I mean, the research is vast on that. So that's the bullshit that I would definitely call out in the industry.
Okay. And then, so then the second half of the challenge is shift happens. So if you could actually make something, if you could wave a magic wand and deal with the bullshit that you just identified a moment ago, what would it be? How would you make it happen?
Yeah, well, it's what I referenced earlier. It's advisor education, pre-licensing education that would present academic evidence, the academic evidence that we have, and it is vast on active management and on costs and how important that stuff is, and how active managers don't replicate past performance. All of that stuff would be so great to have part of pre-licensing requirements, and it's just not there. And regardless of what a particular advisor believes, you have to know what research is out there. I mean, you mentioned in the book that a lot of people in the industry don't know who FAMA is, right? And that's like maybe not knowing who Freud is if you're into psychology or something, right? Anyway, I just think education is key, and having the right education would be really helpful.
Great. Well, I strongly agree with that. So, Michelle, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on. This is the sort of thing where you're one of the good ones in the industry, and I'm very glad that we have people like you at Newcom who are helping to help advisors get better, and ultimately, as you say, helping investors get a better experience as a result of the work that you're doing as a resource for advisors to actually add value and to make everyone better off as a result. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care.
Bullshift, the podcast, was created in support of John DeGui's book, Bullshift, available now online and in bookstores everywhere. The comments and opinions are those of the author and his guests. They are for informational purposes and should not be construed as investment advice. John DeGui is an author, public speaker, senior investment advisor, and portfolio manager at Wellington Altus Private Wealth. For more information about John and his books, please visit standup.today. Bullshift, the podcast, is produced by TalkShoe, a division of IOTM.